the discipline of having another interview to do after this is going to keep it brief. So when I say just a quick one, I am on the clock. So I'll start fast. First thing, a few points of just housekeeping stuff, and this will be less than 60 seconds. I wasn't very clear when I told you that the next phase of the Summoning the Self course is now out. You don't have to, if you've already bought the Summoning the Self course, you don't have to buy it again. What I was telling you is that I promised you a course, so I know what I'm saying, but you're not psychic. You don't know what I'm saying. I did say this, but I said it once, months ago. So you'd be forgiven, especially in the times we're living in, if you don't remember what a YouTuber said to you about his fucking course 5 months ago. I'm like, why don't people understand me? And then I was like, well, maybe you're not communicating as clearly, because I'm inside my own head, obviously. I live in here, for better or worse. So I know what I'm talking about all the time. Why should you know what I'm talking about? If you've already bought it, then you get that automatically. The second part, the Summoning the Self course, you just log in as normal. I'm there every day, ready to ask questions. I thought I'd have a ton of questions. Logged in today, put aside an hour. I was like, only an hour. Let's do this. And there was 2 questions. It was 14 minutes. I was like, nobody wants to talk to me. Usually everybody wants to talk to me. Today I felt very sad and lonely. Right, into shadow work. So today, via email, I got an email from a chap called Mark, who I've been speaking to on and off through the interwebs. I think for at least 4 or 5 years, and he's been to a couple of my seminars and that. And he asked me a question about shadow work, and I sort of fed back to him like, I don't really, sometimes people ask me questions and the coordinates of the question are off. So I'm like, I can't really answer the question the way that you phrased it. Maybe we should start with like a definition, like where are you getting your definition of shadow work from? And his reply, which is a reasonable reply, was that he'd gotten the impression that it was pretty much open to being subjectively defined. Whose fault is that? Carl Jung's fault. There's more than one Carl Jung, and we'll come back to this, I hope, if we have time. We'll come back to this theme of split personalities and dissociative identity disorder in this video. You've got it with me. You watch a video of me from 2014 versus now. It's not really the same entity speaking. The coordinates are very different. The demeanor is different. Maybe you'd see the differences as being subtle, but it's different. Jung, Y-O-U-N-G, Jung. I had a friend at school. One of my best friends at school was a Chinese lad called Carl Jung, and it was Jung, as in the Cantonese name Jung, which is Y-E-U-N-G. And I was like, oh, there's a psychologist called Carl Jung. And he goes, I know. I fucking know. Why do you think I wouldn't know that? And I was like, I bet your dad doesn't know that. He went, he does. That's why he called me Carl, because he fucking loves Carl Jung. So fair enough then. It's Carl Jung's fault. Carl Jung, the one from Vienna, not the one from Hong Kong, was a different man to later in his life. And I, on this channel, have been very dismissive because of the issue that we're going to talk about today of Carl Jung. And it was wrong of me because I hadn't read enough of him. And I hate when other people do this. I hate it, which is an expression of my shadow, because they're doing something that's intellectually lazy. And I hate that because I don't like it when I'm intellectually lazy. And I was, ironically enough, intellectually lazy with Carl Jung. Didn't read enough of him. I read people's opinions of him. I read quotes of his. I read snippets and I read around him. And sometimes I watched YouTube videos about him. I'm going to let you all on in a little secret right here and now. You can't really learn about psychology from YouTube videos. Oh, you're joking, aren't you, Richie? What are we doing here? You can't really learn about the subject of psychology from YouTube videos. You can learn the style, you can learn the flavor, you can learn the concepts, but you won't have, you could watch YouTube videos for 10 years and you won't penetrate it. I'm, as you know, dismissive. I have been dismissive of Carl Jung, and I am dismissive of psychology now compared to where I was, but it's still a legitimate field of study, and it still takes years of hard work to penetrate the subject to any meaningful degree. And even though we say psychology, it's a vast amount of subject space. So even then, you'd have to just choose a niche. And if you said to me, I really want to understand Jungian psychology, I'd be like, get into the books then. You've got 3 years of study ahead of you, focusing on Jung and the people who wrote about Jung thereafter. Or you said psychoanalytic theory. Try and sign up for a psychoanalytic theory master's. I tried it. It's really tough because what you need to know, the depth of information you need, is pretty extensive. This is the psychoanalytic theory course. I won't mention the college or the professor that fucked me off because I was too old. A 63-year-old professor said to me, "You're too old to study." And I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, Carl Jung didn't define shadow work very well. And as a result, people are confused. That's his fault. That is his fault. He is very clear on certain subjects at certain points in his life. Razor sharp clarity. Easily, in my humble opinion, for my money, as sharp and as insightful as Nietzsche, who he loved, who he read a lot of. But then you have the other side of Carl Jung at different phases of his life where everything is poetic, metaphysical, mystical, and entirely subjective and symbolic. And it was incredibly ill-disciplined of him to release that work in the way that he did, I think, and naive. It was naive. It was ill-disciplined, it was self-indulgent, and it was naive. I love him. He's brighter than me. I'll never attain the heights that he did. I think he was just more gifted than I am. And I'm not, when I criticize somebody, I'm not putting myself above them necessarily. I'm just telling you the truth of what I see. So whose fault is it that shadow work now has this massive range of interpretation that ends up being, well, isn't it just whatever you want it to mean? Whose fault is it that people think shadow work is whatever you want it to mean? It's Carl Jung's. When you express something mystically or poetically through symbols and through vagary, and you allow things to be open, like you look at like a Salvador Dali painting. There's a sculpture in town, actually in Prague right now, that's an original Salvador Dali sculpture. And it has a poetic quality to it because it's imagery. But in order for poetry to be poetry, it has to evoke imagery. Well, what do you get from shadow work? Work as a shadow. I'm like, what is that? Do shadows ever work? They do. There's a novel by, what's his name, Murakami, where a shadow is separated from his master and is made to work in a labor scenario, sort of a Game of Thrones labor dungeon. That's the only time I've ever heard of that, though. The only other shadow work I've done, sticking with the theme of Japan, I suppose, is when I was doing ninjutsu and I was a member of the Shadow Society. And they'd run around Birkenhead in black hoods and black gis with the things on the, looking like shinobi from feudal Japan. I never wore it. I just went in a tracksuit. I was like, if you're a ninja, you're supposed to blend into the background. How's this blended into the background? So if it's evocative of imagery, what kind of image do you get from that? Like you're working in the shadows, you're working with your shadow. It's magical. It's moonbeams and cats and spells and crystals and guess who talks about Jung and espouses shadow work and espouses an alleged Jungian philosophy loudly? Well, your self-help gurus, your life coaches, your magicians and witches, and even psychologists misapprehend it. Why? Because it's hard. It's really hard. It's hard. Like reading Jung directly, source Jung, is tough. Why? Because you're reading the words of a very intelligent man who had the luxury and the ability to have a developing conversation, which is usually what scientific endeavor is, that went on for decades. And wherever you read, you're probably like 25 years behind him. And you're like, what are we talking about here, Mr. Young? I don't know what it is you're on about. Or it's very hard to penetrate what you're on about. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful thinking that because you've read a couple of articles on Psychology Today, or you read some spiritual guru's blog, or you watched a couple of videos about shadow work, that you're actually learning anything. There's a furore at the moment about the New York Times saying that critical thinking isn't good for you. But I'll tell you one of the points that was made that I think is entirely valid and very relevant here on this channel and channels like this, is you do have to be careful of watching videos that flatter your intellectual vanity. I myself, because I was busy and I was doing something else and I couldn't read at that point. I had stuff to do that day. I went through 6 different YouTube videos that were between 10 and 15 minutes long, trying to nail down, trying to have a definition of a ubiquitous Gnostic worldview. Never, it seems to me, has so much hot air been spilt on a subject. And in the end, you know what I had to do? I had to go and find a reliable source online and read it. And it took me about 7 minutes to ingest it. But when I was trying to do it through YouTube, it was 1 hour and 15, and I didn't learn anything because people talk around the subject when it has a mythological or poetic element to it, which actually, as it happens, the Gnostic worldview isn't really that hard to grasp. I don't know why people gasbag so much about it instead of just saying, look, this is what most Gnostics believe. Here are the names. Similarly with Jungian shadow work. Why don't we just get to the point and say what Jung told us to do that was shadow work? Well, I can't find many references to Carl Jung actually even using the term. Have you seen the quote that goes around online? This is an interesting one. It's often attributed to Carl Jung. If you don't make the unconscious conscious, you will repeat your mistakes and call it fate, or something like that. And I'm a bugger for this because I'm a pedant. I read that quote about 3 months ago, and I was like, that is anachronistic. I don't believe that he used that language. I could just hear it in the language. I'm like, that sounds too modern. Lo and behold, he didn't say it. He didn't say it. There's no reference to Carl Jung saying it. It's the most misattributed quote of Carl Jung's. But he did sort of say it in spirit. And I'll explain this, and it relates to shadow work. And then we'll get a bead on what shadow work actually is and try and hold to that, because it's a very, very useful concept, especially now, not just for us, CPTSD, codependency, recovering from narcissism. Everybody needs to understand this shadily, shadowy, poetically defined shadow work. The conscious to unconscious quote and fate, the nearest thing, and I found this on, I think I found it on a Reddit forum or something, and I'm convinced, it's not proof, what I'm offering you is not proof, but it was very convincing, was a transcript of Jung talking to his students about the tarot. And he spoke about the star of the major arcana, saying that the star represents fate and your lucky star. And then he gave like a psychoanalytic, psychodynamic view of the significance of the tarot. And he did say in much longer sentences, much more flowery language, something akin to, we have to make the unconscious conscious. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to go around the houses, we're going to deal with that, we're going to not deal properly with our impulses, our desires, our tastes, and our habits, and we will call that the star, and we'll claim that it's just fate. It just happened that way. Maktub, sort of forgive my Arabic. Maktub, it is written, as it would be in Islam. It's already written. It's predestined. Don't change it. Don't worry about it. It's already, the hand that writes all things has already written this also. So he didn't actually say that. Back to shadow work. Jung talks about the effect of the shadow and the structure of the shadow, and he talks about individuation. But when I just checked now and went through the source material that I found last time, and I double checked it again. He is talking as though he's referring to a particular part of the map that clinicians and clients are going to encounter again and again. And he sort of describes how to deal with it, but it's not prescriptive at all. So I said, fine, maybe people who follow in Jung's footsteps will be prescriptive. So I went to look at their source material, even the published research on this. And do you want to know what it says? If anybody can find anything better or more specific that is either by Jung himself or by a respected authority in the Jungian tradition, comment below. I will go and read it personally. I'll do a video on it and I'll pin the comment. But it can't be your favorite blogger saying, well, they say it's the 5 steps to shadow work, or it's got to be a proper, respected Jungian source. What everybody says, like the proper sources and even the published research, it's always something along the lines of, there are unconscious impulses that affect conscious life. If you make those unconscious impulses conscious, things will be better for you. And you will say, well, yes, it's that, but it's the disavowal of parts of your personality, and it's the disavowal of strengths that you place into another place, and that's called the shadow. And it's kind of like the Freudian unconscious, but not quite really. I'm talking function here, folks. I ain't got time. And none of you do. Nobody has time. Maybe people think they do, but they don't. To go round and around the houses with conceptualizations. Let me tell you something else about the shadow and how YouTube functions as the shadow, and YouTube videos can function as a masturbatory, narcissistic tool that appeals to your intellectual vanity. Are you watching a lot of videos describing the ways in which people malfunction? Are you doing a lot of descriptive learning or prescriptive learning? Descriptive learning is absolutely fine. If you want more and more descriptions, it is none of my business. It's nobody's business. But don't kid yourselves. You're not going anywhere like that. More and more descriptions of the shadow is not going to help you. More and more descriptions of narcissism, which could be said to be an individualized representation of the collective shadow, because maybe a narcissist is, in our culture, is just somebody who has the balls to do what we all secretly hope we would do. That's a very controversial statement, but it's not wild, folks. It's not that wild, especially if you're interested in Jung and Freud, but Jung particularly. If there's a certain percentage of the population who's acting in a certain way that we all collectively agree that we don't like, I couldn't imagine that if we rose the dead, like he was a Jedi ghost. He was a Jedi ghost simulation, perfect artificial intelligence of Jung, age 55, wise but not completely crack. It's not completely psychotic. That he wouldn't say to you, or he wouldn't say so directly, but wouldn't offer that this is a representation of the shadow. And why do people go online to talk about narcissists and how awful they are? It's projection, it's scapegoating, it's a psychological release. Why do we write angry comments about narcissists and bad people? It's scapegoating. Let him without sin cast the first stone, where it's masturbatory. It's addictive. That's why it's cyclical. That's why I've been saying for years, like, why is everybody hanging around for 3-4 years or more to talk about narcissism? You didn't learn it within 6 months and move on. That's descriptive. Prescriptive psychology is quite weak on, which they're smart to be weak on prescriptions in psychology. If you prescribe something, you can be wrong. If you describe something, you can never really be wrong, because we're dealing with models. Like if I say, it seems to me that the human being has a thing that's called the shadow, and then one day you say, there's no such thing as the shadow, and I can prove it, here's some really strong evidence. You can always say, well, Number one, that's your interpretation. And if it's really strong evidence, I can say, well, I was only talking poetically anyway. It was just a model. Shadow boxing, martial arts again, being sneaky, being a ninja, avoiding the shots as they come through. That's psychology's shadow side, is it's non-prescriptive. It's suggestive and descriptive, but not prescriptive. Mr. Young, what should people do to integrate and assimilate the shadow, and then to individuate? You won't get a step-by-step of what to do. When I say it sounds, there's like an implicit journey. It's never really made defined in a nuanced way of the therapeutic process, and that you and your therapist along that journey are going to encounter your shadow, and that through time and over time you will individuate. Back to my mate who I was emailing with today, Mark, and he was like, well, it could be subjective. People could get to say whatever they think the shadow is for themselves, and I said it's completely forgivable to think that that's true. But it's wrong. And if that were the case, and everybody could say what they thought shadow work was, then there's no shadow work. Because I could say, I saw guys dual wielding frisbees today and throwing them. They were really good. It was super impressive. Like 3 guys, they would catch the 2 frisbees. They must be on some team or something. Then they'd chuck them at each other and then catch 2 frisbees. And then sometimes they'd chuck them sideways to the 2. And I was like, dual wielding frisbees? I don't even think I could do it with one. With both hands on one frisbees. So I could claim that that's shadow work. Well, who are you to tell me it's not? I throw the frisbee to the dog and the dog brings it back. That's my shadow work. I chant. That's my shadow work. I burn incense. That's my shadow work. I do scrying in the mirror by candlelight. Scrying in the mirror, not crying when you put 9 Inch Nails on and just sob uncontrollably. I've been listening to The Cure again. That's my shadow work. And so he said it could be entirely subjective. And I said if it was, it would be redundant and there's no point in having the term. And he said very reasonably, well, isn't all psychotherapy, all modalities shadow work? And I was like, that's great. Yeah, because by principle, if we're taking people from the unconscious to the conscious, what did Jung say about that? He said it's the therapist's job to bring the client to truth, ultimately, from darkness into light, from chaos into order, from subjectivity to objectivity. Great, down for that. But again, if all psychotherapy is shadow work, why do we say shadow work? We just say therapy. We could just say therapeutic progress, can't we? There's no reason to use this very vague, poetic sounding term. And are you getting that I slightly hate it? Are you getting that I slightly hate what Jung has done? You probably are. But do you understand that I love it and I think it's necessary, and that what I hate is not the concept or what Jung did. It's that what he did really misled, is misleading, and will mislead people because it's too vague, it's too wishy-washy. So I've got people on the ceiling and I'm there with the broom trying to get them down, going, no, not over there, don't do that. I'm doing shadow work. You're not. That's not shadow work. So can we rehabilitate shadow work and keep it Jungian? Yes, I think we can, but we have to try, if we're going to be prescriptive, which if I have a skill or I'm useful for anything, because I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, I'm not up there with like your Adlers, my brain can't operate at the levels they can, but I can make things simple that are complicated, and I'm good at being prescriptive. And I would say if we want to be prescriptive safely in a way that protects Jung and protects shadow work, because if we're not interested in protecting Jung and what he meant, and we're not interested in protecting shadow work, don't worry about it. Just say anything that you want to do is anything at all. Just be completely postmodern, totally social constructionist, apply that useful tool to everything in your life and go, nothing is anything and everything is everything. Everything is nothing, nothing is everything, everything is everything, nothing is nothing. Everything is what I say it is. It's only a social construct. So this is my shadow work. I want to Pierre XO is going to enjoy that clip. I slightly ripped it off from him. This is my therapeutic work. Who are you to tell me it isn't? How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? It's my therapeutic shadow work. Have some respect. That's how I do it. What do you do? It's called cranial bottle tapping. Don't diss cranial. It's CBT. Oh, cranial bottle tapping is CBT. He's been doing that CBT again. Cranial bottle tapping. Somebody asked me about whether something was NLP today. They were like, "Oh, you're doing the thing for Iconic this Saturday, the live event on Saturday. Is that NLP?" And I was like, "NLP, nefarious, lifelong pantomime." What does it mean? To keep it Jungian and to protect it and to make it something that is still within the tradition, we should stick to the principles that we can confidently say he would approve of. If we are leading the unconscious to the conscious, and we're doing it in that, because he was a mystically principled man, he would have, if martial arts philosophy was more known in the West at that time, he would have been more into it. But he was into Taoism, he was into the tarot, the Chinese oracle, the I Ching, and mandalas and so on. We'd say, okay, it's yin yang. We're going darkness, chaos, potentiality into order and light with these issues so that we can see them. Doesn't mean that light is superior to dark. Doesn't mean that chaos is superior to order. It's all about integration. It's all about balance. And that's what he wanted. Balance and integration. He was quite Freudian in a way, even though they fell out, because he still believed with like key concepts, like you take a drive and you push it down, it's going to be bad. In Jung's case, in Freud's case, it would show up in your body. It would be somatized, or you project it out on somebody else, and there'd be projective identification. And with Jung, he would say, well, it will possess you. It's a more mystical, slightly more. So all of psychoanalysis is mystical. It's all occult, because occult means in the dark. It all happens in the dark. All psychoanalysts and most psychotherapists are effectively occult investigators. They go into dark, haunted houses of people's minds and they pull things out because people are there going, there are ghosts screaming and noises banging. That's what anxiety and depression is. And then the good psychologist goes in, pulls it out and goes, oh, you didn't know you had this in that back room, did you? That door was hanging off. Should we fix that? You go and fix it. If we're making the unconscious conscious, we can claim we're doing shadow work. If we're moving into the disavowed parts of ourselves therapeutically, we can claim we're doing shadow work. So if you're going to make the unconscious conscious, and if you're going to reclaim the disavowed parts of yourself, how would you know if it's shadowy shadow work or not? Or you're not just following the words of some fucking charlatan who's taken this fascinating, open-ended, hard to define concept and using it for their own, profit, for their own gain. You could say this, the rule should be, it should probably be uncomfortable. You should feel irritated, pressured, impatient. If you're doing shadow work and you're like, oh, this is exciting, I'm really curious, it's like, ooh, I wonder what I'm going to find out about me next. It's like, that's probably not shadow work. You'll be irritated, you'll be angry, you'll be emotionally dysregulated, you'll be defensive. You will be in a bit of a battle with yourself because there's parts of yourself that want to hold on to that. They want to keep things in the shadow. They want to keep things in the shadow. They want to keep things in the unconscious. I have the emotional literacy exercise. I would fully claim that this is one of the most, as far as I'm aware, it's the most direct way of doing shadow work, because you're literally going, what are the things in my unconscious I don't want to look at? Feelings. Nobody wants to deal with their feelings. Nobody wants to deal with their emotions. So it's the most shadowed parts of ourselves. And what do? We write them down and make them specific. That is from shadow into light. I don't see how you could get any more literal than that when you write it down on a piece of paper. The 30-day challenge that I just released on the Richard Grannon Philosophy channel. It's not all shadow work, but it's mostly shadow work. And what happens? People get irritated. They get confronted. They get upset because I'm pushing them. I'm pushing them in the shadow. I'm giving them a good poke in the disavowals. What's your intent? Well, no, I don't know actually. Neither do you. Write it down. Oh, I don't know. It's, no. That's you pushing into the shadow. Did you know that? When you won't say what you're trying to get done, you're in shadow. What are your values? Oh, I don't know. Good things. No, not good enough. Write them down. Oh, it's irritating. It makes me feel impatient and irritated, a bit angry. Write them down and look at them. Your values are your coordinates for what you move towards in life. Why would you not want to see that? So it's not things always that are in total darkness, by the way. Shadow could be just on the edge of and you're like, I know I have an issue there. I don't like that very much. I know that my response to that is not reasonable. I know I'm emotionally dysregulated and I'm being unfair and disproportionate on this issue. That's shadow work. Anything that's like that, you can go there. And the emotional literacy tool is a great way of doing it, because you'd be like, what am I feeling? Not what am I thinking? Not what am I thinking? That's conscious. That's ego. That's light. That's logos. That's the logos. That's word. It's so easy to lie. It's the easiest thing in the world to lie. Your feelings don't lie. They don't lie at all. They don't speak. They don't have language. They're incapable. They're innocent. They're in the Adam and Eve state before the snake. They're incapable of lying to you. What do I really feel about this? The guy's irritating me because I'm jealous of him. Oh God, I'm jealous of him. Oh God, what a shitty. Oh God, wow, so great. So I'm jealous, which means I'm insecure, and it means I'm petty, and it means I'm probably vengeful. Shadow work. It's not jerking off in the ego ideal. Okay, oh, this is how I'm amazing, or I'm the coolest. No, you're not the coolest. You're not the coolest. Neither am I. Neither's anybody. There's no saints here. If you're not sure, by the way, let me just deal with that. You're not a saint. Nobody watching this is a saint. Nobody. Literally nobody. The other people commenting, they're not saints. Don't worry about it, because they're not. I already know. I'm not a saint. Don't worry about it. I already know. Shadow possession is rife. It's absolutely rampant. This is why I say narcissism is a very important subject. It is, but it's nothing compared to codependency and shadow work. What's the route out of codependency? Oh God. It's the ring finger on my left hand, which in Jungian terms, in Jungian dream analysis, the ring finger represents my relationship with myself, and it's eternal, and it joins all parts of me together, and it's on my left hand, which is the yin side, which is chaos and potentiality. So if somebody says to you, what are you doing? You'd be like, fuck off, I'm doing my shadow work. Only the left hand, only the ring finger of your left hand. Oh, I don't have time to go into the other stuff I was going to go into. Just very, very briefly. When you see a subject and you go, oh, I've got this. I know what this is. Assume you don't. Assume you don't. Even if you've listened to hours on it. You could be in an echo chamber. You could be listening to, right. Actually, that's a perfect example to wrap up with. I speak Spanish. I have a friend. She's an ex-girlfriend of mine. We speak Spanish to each other. And we speak Spanish freely to each other because she can't judge me and I can't judge her because neither of us is Spanish. We both know it's wrong, but we speak Spanish to each other with the greatest confidence because neither of us can say, you conjugated that verb wrong, that verb is reflexive, that, you can't say that, you miss. Neither of us can do that. We're in an echo chamber of two. The difference is we don't think we're speaking good Spanish. We're not crazy. We know we're speaking bad Spanish, but we have no other means of communicating with each other. So we speak our GCSE level, high school grade Spanish to each other, and that's how we communicate. That's an echo chamber. It's untested. Assume you don't know. Don't proceed assuming Don't proceed because you've heard the term shadow work. You know what it is. A lot of psychologists don't really know what it is. Remember, folks, a lot of psychologists don't really know what narcissism is. They don't really know what codependency is. That's more forgivable because there's multiple interpretations of that, and it's not really a clinical definition. But even so, you shouldn't have no idea. You should at least have read, if you're seeing face-to-face clients, you should have read at least some articles on Psychology Today by other psychologists, and I would hope a bit of research into the issue of being fused and merged with another person, of being a people pleaser, of being a fawn responder, of being a codependent. One would hope. So don't overassume. And just because you can recognize something doesn't mean you know it. Just because you've heard the word shadow work before doesn't mean you know it. I used to run self-defense forums, and we chat to lads and girls on forums, and they'd make claims. They'd say, I know boxing. And I'd be like, do you mean you know boxing? Like when Neo in The Matrix had martial arts downloaded into his brain through the cerebral cortex, and he woke up and went, oh, I know jujitsu. Oh, I know kung fu. Do you mean that? Or do you mean that you can recognize the sport of boxing when you look at it on the TV? And you might say, God, that's so pedantic. Why'd you push people like that? Because they're confused. They don't know. Just because you recognize boxing doesn't mean you can jump in the ring and do fucking 3 2-minute rounds. Because you know what? It's really hard. Same with psychology. It's actually way harder and way more in depth than it looks. And when you have like a perception of things that you got from movies or books, YouTube videos, think piece articles, it's no good, man. It's really no good. And it's so important to have the humility to say, I don't really understand this. So 2 announcements. Summoning the Self Part 2 of the course is out. If you go to SpartanLifeCoach.com and click that link there that says Summoning the Self, you can get it. That means you get the full course. You get Summoning the Self Part 1, Summoning the Self Part 2. You get the whole thing. You buy it once, you get everything. There's a third part of the course that's coming out in a couple of months, and then it will be complete. That'll be everything I have to say about codependency and prescriptively recovering from it, which will include shadow work. But yeah, you just pay for it once, and it's all there. It's all there for you. I gave people the impression they'd have to pay me again and again. No, just one time, that's it. It's done. And the other thing is, there's the live event on Iconic that's on Saturday. That'll be doing. I think I'm doing talking for about 2 hours, and it's on from 6 p.m. UK time. You can look it up on Iconic by putting in Iconic Richard Grannon. And later on, after I've done this interview, I will post a link in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for your time and your attention. I truly do appreciate it. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Cheers.